us today. My name is Ken Levinson. I'm the Executive Director at WITA. We're delighted to have so many of you here on this beautiful fall morning. I don't know if you were picking up on the little joke we had playing. We were playing REM music, This Is the End of the World as We Know It, on the speakers. I think that was Stacy. I can't remember if it was Stacy or Bruce on the way. It was Bruce on the way in. So a few of you, I think, were in on the joke. Fortunately, Diego was not and thought there was something wrong with the sound system in the room, which, my bad. Apologies, Diego. Really delighted to have you all here today. We've had variants on this conversation for the past few years as we've been discussing here in Washington and in Geneva the issues with the WTO that the United States has been raising for many, many years. And we really put together today what I think is an all-star panel to have a discussion that I suspect once we upload the video will probably be watched in Geneva as well, with DSB meetings happening and discussions there taking place this week. And I think Terry was telling me that tomorrow there's some meetings taking place. So it's a really pertinent issue. Interestingly, the USTR's first brief on this was written more than 15 years ago, I think, with Bruce Hirsch, who's here on our panel, his hand in that. And some of these issues have been around since then. And my own personal history working on the Uruguay round in the US Senate, when we were writing helping write the implementing legislation, these were issues that we were addressing at that time, and people like Terry and Jennifer were people that I was talking with when I was on the Hill in those days helping to draft this, and Ambassador Lighthizer was talking about some of the sort of seeing where this was headed even at that time, and was raising some of those issues with some of us on Capitol Hill 25 years ago. So these are not new issues, but they're ones that are finally at this point, it seems, coming to a head. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you all for doing this. My good friend Stacy Ettinger for moderating this discussion as well. And Marvin, thank you for joining us. Super important for those of us in Washington to hear the perspectives of some of our trading partners in the other countries that are active in the WTO and actually had a big hand in helping create the DSU as well during the Uruguay round, and I know Canada played a big and important part in that. So thank you all to the entire panel for being here. We look forward to seeing all of you at our future events. I want to flag on the back of your flyer is information on our International Trade Conference. We had the first one January of 2019. The second one will be February 4th, 2020. It's going to be a fantastic event. I think everybody who came to the one last January really enjoyed it. We're already beginning to line up some terrific speakers, but I want to really point out to you is we're running a special pre-sale for tickets for it, 30% off ticket prices through next Thursday, through Thanksgiving. That's going to be the lowest prices we'll probably have the whole time. So if you want to get tickets for that now, I'd recommend would be the time to do it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward. Once the panel is finished, we'll have questions with the audience. I know some terrific people here, including my good friend Jim Colby. Always an honor to have you, sir, in the audience, and always raise the quality of the dialogue when you're here. So thank you for joining us. Stacy.
Thanks, Ken. Well, it's Crisis Week here in Washington, so why don't we talk about crisis at the WTO? I'm just going to set the stage a little bit before I turn it over to our panelists. Again, I know that most people in the audience are aware, but let me just run through a few of the highlights about the dispute settlement understanding and how there were some key changes during the Uruguay round, the key features, more detailed procedures and specific deadlines. Again, this is for dispute settlement, automatic adoption of panel and appellate body reports unless there's a consensus not to do so, authorization of countermeasures against a party that fails to implement a ruling, again, unless there's consensus not to do so. So the dispute settlement system has been perhaps oversubscribed, which is maybe part of what led to the crisis. But since 1995, there have been 591 disputes that have been brought to the WTO. The most recent one last week, I'm sure we'll go down in history as a dumping case involving frozen fries. So always good to know we're on top of things. Over 350 rulings have been issued. And why are we here today? Well, in part, the United States has been blocking appointment of new members of the appellate body since mid-2017. The terms of 2 of the 3 remaining appellate body members, out of a total of 7, are set to expire on December 10th. And the questions: how and why did we get here? What are the substantive and structural problems? How do we resolve the impasse? Is there a way forward? Who's leading the charge? What happens in the interim? Does the dispute settlement mechanism come to a grinding halt? Will some members cobble an alternate sort of system together? And the big picture, what are the consequences for the global trading system? So as Ken said, we have an absolutely amazing panel here today who's going to walk through these issues. So each one of the panelists are going to give a short presentation. After the presentations, I will tee up some questions for the panelists, and they can have a discussion also and comment on each other's, what they've said already, and then leave some time for audience questions at the end. So real quick, a little bit of background on our panelists. First up would be Bruce Hirsch, and he's the founder of Tailwind Global Strategies, which provides strategic advice on global government relations matters, and he also serves as of counsel to Capital Counsel LLC. And he's had a long career in the United States government at USTR and at the Senate Finance Committee. And very relevant for our conversation this morning is that he served as USTR's chief counsel for dispute settlement and is legal advisor to the U.S. mission to the WTO in Geneva. Then next up will be Terry Stewart. Terry was the managing partner of the law offices of Stewart Stewart for several decades. He also is an adjunct professor at Georgetown Law and is, as most of you probably know, a frequent speaker on WTO matters and other trade matters. After that, we'll hear from Jennifer Hillman. Jennifer is currently a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, talking about international trade, foreign policy issues. She's also a professor at Georgetown Law, again, teaching on trade, international business, and again, very relevant for this conversation. She is a former member of the Appellate Body, having served in Geneva on the Appellate Body from 2007 through 2012. And last but not least, we have Minister Marvin Hildebrand from the Canadian Embassy. He is the head of the Trade and Economic Section at the Embassy since 2017. He began his career working on agricultural and agri-food issues and served as the agriculture counselor at the embassy in DC earlier in his career. And he also, throughout his career, has been involved in trade policy, trade negotiations, including 5 different free trade agreement negotiations, 3 of which he served as the chief negotiator. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Bruce.
Good, thanks very much, Stacy, and I'd like to thank WITA for asking me to appear today on this panel. Before going into how we got here, I just want to briefly mention what's at stake. We all know that the dispute settlement system is critical for actually resolving disputes that members bring, but it's also critical for avoiding disputes in the first place, because just the mere fact that the system's available has resolved disputes. The threats of disputes, but not even that, because in general, the system helps to just ensure that there's a general level of respect for the rules. And the system also is really critical in a way that we're seeing right now the challenge. It's critical in avoiding tit for tat retaliation in trade wars, because members have agreed that they will accept results. They understand that they may be subject to penalties if they don't comply, and they don't then respond with their own retaliation for those penalties. So it's an important system, and that's what's at stake. Now, how did we get here? Stacy's mentioned in the short term, as a short-term matter, we're here because the U.S. has been blocking appointments to the appellate body. But the longer-term answer is that these are concerns that have been brewing for really a considerable period of time, decades even, that have just been creeping up over time since really almost the early 2000s. The basic concern of the U.S. is that the appellate body has over time expanded its own mandate to become a rulemaker rather than a body that is there to review panel findings, legal findings for mistakes. The appellate body was conceived really pretty much at the last minute during the Uruguay round. It was considered necessary because for the first time, the panel results were going to be automatically adopted. Members could no longer block them, and it was considered that there was a need for the second stage review to ensure that there weren't mistakes. But it was conceived as having a limited mandate to just review and not to go beyond that. Over time, the appellate body role has evolved. It's increasingly experimented with opining on various provisions. In the U.S. view, it has actually gone on to start filling in gaps and expanding existing obligations. And that's contrary to the U.S. view that the WTO agreement is basically a contract, that members agree to what is in the document, and that it's the role of the dispute settlement system to simply enforce what's there and no more. That the system provides security and predictability by taking known rules and only using known rules of interpretation, so that members in 1995 could have predicted how they would be applied. Now, against that view, there's other members, notably the EU, take the position that this new institution, the appellate body, plays a role more similar to that of the European Court of Justice, which is designed to help complete the project of fleshing out multilateral rules. And they point to the responsibility of the appellate body and of the dispute settlement system to interpret rules as meaning that they need to give a meaning to some of these vague and ambiguous provisions, and that is all that's been happening. The U.S. Quietly and then less quietly expressed concern about the direction that the appellate body is on. Back in the early 2000s, there was a process, which is still ongoing actually, it's a formal matter, of reviewing the operation of the dispute settlement system. And as part of that process in the mid-2000s, the U.S. submitted a number of proposals that Ken alluded to that I helped draft. But the problem at the time, was the same as that for other WTO negotiations, which is that in order to make changes and even to provide guidance on how the existing rules are to be applied, you need a consensus of the membership, and that was always lacking. Some members, like the EU, were perfectly satisfied with the way things were going. Others who may not have agreed with how various panels and the appellate body got to certain results were nevertheless happy with the results, and so they didn't speak up. And others who may have agreed with U.S. concerns just looked at the fact that there wasn't a whole lot that appeared to be possible to do about it, so they weren't sticking their heads up. After all, what was the U.S. going to do? Break the system? And that's sort of how we find ourselves where we are right now. In terms of the specific concerns, there are procedural concerns and there are substantive concerns. Procedurally, there's concern that, first of all, appellate body members are staying in their roles past the time that their term expires, subject to a rule that the appellate body itself has created, so-called Rule 15. Then also there's the concern that the appellate body is going beyond a strict limit in the dispute settlement understanding to complete their work in 90 days. Here as well, this in some sense is symbolic of the U.S. concern that the appellate body is making rules for itself, because until 2011, the appellate body would ask the litigants, can we go beyond 90 days? And inevitably they said yes, but starting in 2011, they just stopped asking. Substantively, there are a few concerns. There's the gap-filling concern, which I mentioned, which is really the central substantive concern. There's this concern that instead of focusing only on the dispute before them, that the appellate body increasingly is giving advisory opinions on issues that really aren't necessary to resolve the dispute. Then there's the treatment of the way that the appellate body has been reviewing fact-finding, in particular treating domestic law as something which is something to be reviewed in its entirety. And then finally, there's the issue of precedent, that rather than considering previous panel and appellate body reports only to the extent that they've gotten the answer correct, that they're being treated as really something that must be followed, especially if it's from the appellate body. At the recent October 28th dispute settlement body meeting, the U.S. flagged an issue that highlighted a couple of these concerns. It's a little bit wonky, but it really is a good illustration of the problem. And that was relating to the Article 6.2 of the DSU, which deals with the terms of reference of the dispute, the subject matter of the dispute, and the limits of what can be discussed in the dispute. And basically, in several years ago in the mid-2000s, the appellate body elaborated on the requirements in the DSU, which basically say you have to identify the measure, you have to identify the WTO provisions that are at issue, and they added, or in the US view, added this requirement, this specific test, how or why the measure violates these provisions. And as the US pointed out in October 28th, this has resulted in a lot of litigation over just whether the how or why standard, which wasn't in the DSU, has been met. And in the context of the dispute that was taken up in October, the appellate body itself said that the panel had taken it too far. They excluded various of Japan's claims, and they reversed the panel. But at that point, there was nothing that Japan could do. Those claims had been rejected. They had never been considered. And so this was something of an unintended consequence of this standard. And, you know, again, in the US view, this illustrates a few of the concerns. One, filling in a gap in a way where it had unintended consequences. Two, the view that panels had to actually follow this precedent. And three, that the appellate body itself wasn't willing to just say, oops, and just stuck to its guns by this, even as it tried to do a workaround on the standard that it had created. In terms of where things are right now, for the past year, Ambassador David Walker of New Zealand has been leading a process to consider the U.S. concerns, made a good deal of progress in educating WTO members on these concerns, and coming up with solutions which in some cases agree with the U.S. And offer some guidance on doing so. He's proposed a decision for consideration in December at the General Council. That's unlikely to meet with success. The U.S. has been engaging in this process really to lay out its concerns in detail, but hasn't engaged to provide specific solutions. And so, unsurprisingly, the principles that Ambassador Walker has laid out fall short on the level of detail. There's a new wrinkle that's just taken place in which the U.S. has reportedly held its agreement on the budget for the next 2 years until it gets answers to some of the questions as to how the budget is going to be used in connection with this appellate body concern. That process is going to play out. But come December 10th, the appellate body will, or 11th, the appellate body will no longer be hearing at least new cases. And then the question will be what next? The EU has been working on a process to basically reproduce the appellate body with those other members that are interested in doing so. To date, Canada and I believe Norway. Other members have been trying to do a workaround. They have agreed that in their panel proceedings, if there isn't an appellate body when the panel report comes out, they will not appeal to an appellate body. And that's important because if you appeal to an appellate body that doesn't exist, then the dispute basically falls into limbo and nothing can be adopted, nothing can become official. You can't get the right, the authority to retaliate. So members are working on their workarounds, but come December 11th, there'll be a lot of confusion, if not the apocalyptic scenario